I cannot remember the first time that I saw Vampire Hunter D. It's a weird thing to think about, right? I mean, others may have that issue with something like Snow White, but for me, Vampire Hunter D has lived rent-free in my head for as long as I can remember. Trying to narrow it down, it had to have been way past my bedtime in the early 90s on the Sci-Fi Channel. My mom had a friend that basically lived off Xena, Hercules, Star Trek, and cigarette butts. Her son was my surrogate older brother and used to enjoy waking me up in the middle of the night with his Spawn action figures or Chucky doll. Last I checked, he was living in the woods in a car somewhere. Anyway, I can clearly imagine myself tearfully going downstairs to complain and ending up watching Vampire Hunter D because it was just on, because the TV was always on, and it was always tuned to the Sci-Fi Network. Later, I would track D down in a movie gallery, my hometown's specific brand of blockbuster knockoff, and eventually I would come in contact with the much better, much sexier sequel, Vampire Hunter D: Bloodlust. However, that first film, simply and aptly titled Vampire Hunter D, has always had a special place in my heart. It certainly had an effect on my tastes, especially in the early 2000s when I was a hop skip away from becoming a straight up mall goth stereotype. And let me just say that there's very few people who can say that they were there before it was cool. And I'm not saying that about me. I'd argue that even within the anime manga sphere in the West, that Vampire Hunter D was never cool, but Hideyuki Kikuchi, the author of D, can certainly say he was there before it was cool. Created, produced, and published in Japan, Vampire Hunter D was about 25 years early on the Western vampire craze of the late 2000s. A vapid fad funded by very horny middle-aged women and perpetuated by girls my age. It was a dark time indeed. But 1983, Japan, there was no Twilight to rip off, no teeny bop money black hole in which to base a novel series around vampires. Kikuchi-san just made what he made because he wanted to do it, and it worked. It was a very slow burn, but hot damn, it worked. And it worked because when you do something the right way, it doesn't always have to be at the right time. The best things in entertainment exist in living, breathing universes. Tolkien's Middle-earth, for example, the Star Wars universe, Marvel and DC's respective interwoven web of characters and locations. Like if you're reading Spider-Man, you know when Peter Parker's crying about MJ that Wolverine is off doing something awesome at that exact same moment. D is no different. The world Kikuchi-san created is vast and storied. Each novel is a snapshot of one corner or another of a land steeped in depression from a dying reign of vampiric overlords that lasted thousands of years. However, you wouldn't know that from simply watching the first film, which is respectively based off the first novel. So today, I want to talk about Kikuchi-san himself, the world he created, and most importantly, Vampire Hunter D, 1985, the classic film that brought D to the West and turned a niche little story into one of the best-selling book series of all time. This is Vampire Hunter D. Let's get into it. Guys, we're back with another Vampire Hunter D video, but this time it's not just because it's one of my favorite franchises, alright? We are also promoting Figurama Collector's most amazing statue to date. That's right, Figurama Collectors have made an absolutely incredible statue of D that has no equal, my friends. Figurama Collectors are still the only figurine company we've ever worked with because their statues are simply the best for every franchise that they work on. And this isn't just some fan-made statue or a piece of plastic. I mean, this is some real substantial stuff. Figurama worked with the man, the myth, the legend, Yoshitaka Amano, who we will talk about later, on the design, and every statue carries his signature on the bottom. For Vampire Hunter D fans, this is the most detailed and authentic statue ever made for the franchise, and this is going to be your once-in-a-lifetime chance to grab it for yourself before it's on eBay for 5 times the price. The statue comes with swappable portraits and arms for D, as well as swords compatible with D's hand or sheathed upon his back while he holds the reins. As always, Figurama statues are limited in number and they do not restock. They always sell out within 24 hours, sometimes as quick as just 1 hour. So if you don't want to miss this once-in-a-lifetime chance to own this amazing collector statue with Yoshitaka Amano's signature on it. Set your alarm right now for September 3rd at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and use our code BPVHDFC for $25 off your pre-order. Again, pre-orders open on September 3rd at 10 a.m. Eastern and use our code BPVHDFC for $25 off. This is the first and only Vampire Hunter D statue of this caliber, so please, if you are the mega fan, do not miss out on your chance to not only own a unique and rare piece, but something that literally just makes your house look better. I don't even know how to explain these things. This is a real deal. So thanks again to Figurama Collectors for sponsoring this video. Now let's get on with the show. The 80s were a weird time. To be fair, I wasn't there, but I was squirted out into the immediate aftermath. You see, by 1980, boomers were about 30 years old. There was also enough money lying around in both America and Japan for them to begin to follow their more, let's say, artistic dreams, the fruit of which would highly influence my upbringing in the 90s. Series like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, The Neverending Story, The Goonies, E.T., Stand By Me, Back to the Future, the list of boomer genre flicks goes on and on. The interesting thing about them is the cultural osmosis they created. Kids in the 80s and 90s grew up with these same kinds of pulp fiction that boomers did when they were kids, thanks to them. Westerns, crazy sci-fi, high fantasy, all of these were mainstays of the pulp fiction that boomers read when they were children. Essentially, the 80s was the first example of a pop culture retro boom. It just happened to be in film. And Japan was really no different, which is where we meet the author of Vampire Hunter D, Hideyuki Kikuchi. He was born in 1949, and remember that because it's very important, in Choshi. Now, I checked out Choshi because I'm interested in where these people come from and how they lived, and I gotta say, it kinda seems like paradise. It's a coastal city in Chiba Prefecture, almost directly east from Tokyo, with a livable population density, which is kinda hard to find in a city in Japan, and it actually kinda reminds me of a big Japanese Cape Cod without all the junkies. It is peninsular, totally surrounded by water, and all about the fishing. But just 4 years before Kikuchi-san was given his first slap on the booty, signaling the harsh reality of consciousness, just 83 miles away, Tokyo was bombed to the ground. Now, this is a lesser known reality of the Second Great War, but it wasn't just Hiroshima and Nagasaki that got leveled by the Americans. Some would say that the nuked cities got off lucky. Tokyo was hit by the biggest and most destructive air raid of the entire war, which completely leveled 16 square miles of the city and killed somewhere between 83 to 100,000 people. The 279 B-29 bombers used 1,665 tons of explosives, but more importantly, brand new incendiaries, consisting of accelerants like napalm to rain down on the mostly wooden city. And while that would have been bad enough, a perfect pattern of weather and wind created a phenomena called a firestorm. Tornadoes of fire ripped through the city, and the air temperatures got so hot that human beings literally burst into flames. The vast majority of the victims were civilians. And 4 years later, when Kikuchi-san was born in beautiful Choshi, a little 2 hours west of him was an apocalyptic wasteland. On top of the casualties, over 1 million people were left homeless. Many of them fled to the country to find family or simply somewhere else to be. And it's very likely that many found themselves in Choshi. This is, of course, conjecture due to the typical reclusiveness of the Japanese, especially Japanese creators, but it would not be a stretch to assume that a young Hideyuki would have been regaled by tales of survivors of the Tokyo bombing, likely a witness to the burn victims, or even visited Tokyo during its reconstruction. So why does this matter, right? We're talking about the 80s, the good times, man. You know, AIDS and crack and Ronald Reagan, bro. Well, just like the American boomers who created the pulp films I grew up enjoying, the Japanese boomers were coming into their own as well in the 80s. However, while the Americans had a wistful sense of Leave It to Beaver nostalgia for the simple times mixed into their genre pieces, their Japanese counterparts had existential horror of post-apocalyptic terror. Vampire Hunter D isn't the first of Kikuchi-san's novels, a list which includes Demon City Shinjuku as well as Wicked City. However, it was where he truly came into his own. The Japanese were highly aware of what was going on entertainment-wise in the West, how the genre pieces were hitting the box office and making the boomers rich as fuck as the kids squeed with joy and bought all the toys. Kikuchi, who had worked as a translator for novels and already had put out Demon City Shinjuku in 1982, wanted to get in on that fat cash. He had already made a name for himself, however, he just couldn't take out the titties and gore, so his endeavor was kind of doomed from the start. In 1983, he put out his personal vision of Indiana Jones in his Treasure Hunter series, and then released the first novel of currently 40 in the Vampire Hunter D series. And why vampires, man? It's 1983, who cares? Well, it's because in the 50s, the Hammer films were huge, particularly the horror of Dracula, which along with many others made their way to Japan. And I can't drive home enough how this was an era of boomer nostalgia. However, Vampire Hunter D isn't simply a horror novel. It is literally coined as post-apocalyptic science fiction, Lovecraftian horror, dark fantasy, occult folktale, romance. And what's weirder is how well that works. The world of D, like I said earlier, is a universe unto itself. Taking place 10,000 years in the future leaves a lot to be uncovered and plenty of time for things to change so drastically as to be unrecognizable. It's enough time for civilizations to rise and fall, for technology to be created and lost, for new legends and myths to arise in the wake of power unimaginable to the filthy, squalling humans lost in the maelstrom of simple survival on an earth forever changed. In short, it's genius. However, the first novel doesn't really explain much, so much as introduce you to some concepts. And this, of course, was the one that was adapted into the movie we're talking about today. It was meant as an introduction to the series, but also something that could work as a standalone in case the novel crashed and burned. However, by the time Vampire Hunter D 1985 was released, there were 3 well-selling novels in the franchise, and the hope was likely that for each novel, an anime would be produced as a counterpart. Obviously, that wasn't the case. In fact, if you know your anime history, or have at least dipped your toes into the wild world of classic anime, D could be written off easily as another weird property some coked out 80s dude threw money at for whatever reason. And if you're in our Patreon and you join the watch parties, you know exactly the kind of stuff that I'm talking about right now. It also doesn't help that the movie was produced by Ashi Productions, who have what I would call an eclectic portfolio to say the least. They've done everything from Violence Jack Harem Bomber to some Mega Man OVA to Futari Ecchi to even Macross 7. I would kind of put them under the category of horny and likes robots. However, D was one of the pioneering anime of the 80s made specifically for an older audience rather than a general one. I imagine the conversation went something like this. Kikuchi-san, can we not have this demon's head erupt into a fountain of blood and maybe take the titty out here? It's a bit much for the kids. To which Kikuchi replied, fuck the kids. And it turns out that attitude kind of worked. In a way, films like Vampire Hunter D were exactly what American audiences, in particular, were waiting for. They just didn't know it. However, because of this, the film was given a pretty low budget, leaving its finished look somewhere between televised anime and a movie. It did simply okay. However, it was one of the earlier films of this type to be brought to America after Akira's eventual cult success. It had a small US theatrical release in 1992 and then ended up in my brain thanks to the Sci-Fi Channel. Another important thing to remember is that 1992 wasn't exactly the golden age of English anime voice work. Films like Vampire Hunter D were brought overseas mainly by enthusiastic fans who happened to work in the business. Nevertheless, we got it, and in the shape it was in, but it opened doors for Americans into the world of D and adult anime. So what I want to do now is take a look at the first couple minutes. The movie opens up with a tiny crawl that gives you the absolute minimum information. This story takes place in the distant future when mutants and demons slither through a world of darkness. Cool, okay. However, the accompanying imagery is what really catches the eye. The twisted and beautiful yet decrepit castle in the middle of a rusty red wasteland backlit by the moon while a blood-red planet hangs in the equally red sky. This kind of architecture and imagery isn't something that would be widely appreciated until the release of Bloodborne on PS4 in 2015, a full 30 years later. This landscape, as well as much of the visual flair to the world of D, is almost completely thanks to the vision of our Lord and Savior, Yoshitaka Amano. Like Kikuchi-san, Amano-san now enjoys celebrity status. He is responsible for creating Gatchaman, Tekkaman the Space Knight, Hutch the Honeybee, and Kashan. However, it was around 1982 when he went independent that he really took off as an artist. And one of his first projects was illustrating for Vampire Hunter D in 1983. Oh, and he also designed basically every single Final Fantasy character ever created, but you know, whatever. Amano actually worked very closely with the animation department on the film, which is kind of unusual, but he had prior experience from his years working on none other than Speed Racer, and it's thanks to that even with a relatively small budget, D came out at least unique. So moving on, we see a young girl cautiously walking through long grass bathed in shadow. Somewhere within range, a monster is looking for food, and on first sight, it looks like a cross between a dinosaur and an alien from Alien. When she hears the monster, she rushes forward and blasts it with light. Clearly, this is a trap of some kind. The monster turns, and she shoots it in the neck, creating a giant spurt of blood. The creature then spits blood back at the girl, who cleanly dodges it as it inexplicably explodes. A chase begins. Buttshot, the girl calls her horse. While she rides, she raises her energy rifle and fires 3 more shots, the last hitting the monster in its head, which explodes in a ball of gore. Closing in on the felled whore, the girl checks to make sure it's dead. Satisfied with the results, she turns, but the monster rears up and latches onto the neck of her horse. And I mean, look at this horse. It's having a bad day. It's then that she pulls out a whip, wraps it around the creature's neck, and somehow this thing has the ability to send an electric current through it. I don't know. She then shoots the monster's head clean off its neck. Turning to check on her horse, which personally I would have considered a lost cause by now, she sees its throat in the jaws of a giant werewolf. Horse in mouth, it carefully tears her cross off of her neck with one finger and scoots away. Out of nowhere, a giant vampire shows up in a bolt of lightning. The girl recognizes him as a noble and ineffectively fires at him, only for him to pull out the fangs. The screen goes black, and boom, Vampire Hunter D logo. Guys, that is 5 minutes, and in that 5 minutes we get futuristic weapons, a mutant monster that can live with its brains hanging out, knowledge that humans are still riding horses, the idea of the strength and intelligence and that werewolves exist, and the fact that vampires are considered nobles and guns don't do jack to them, the fact that this is going to be very bloody, and of course, buttshot. I feel that this scene alone really sets the precedent for the film. The budget may have not been up to snuff, which generally leaves things lacking in the animation department, but they knew where to put their assets, and ultimately the writing and directing does the job. It's clear that the people working on D believed in their project and did the absolute best with what they had. Not only is this fantastic imagery, I mean, you know exactly what you're going to be getting right off the bat, but it is also a ton of visual information that isn't just explained to you. It's shown rather than told, and much of D is like that. The environment and people within the stories tell you about the world and the state of things. And then of course, you get D himself, a tall man with long beautiful hair riding a mechanical horse, wearing a black wide-brimmed pointed hat, huge caped coat, and a wicked curved sword across his back. He is cold, unflappable, and seemingly drifts about unendingly across the windy plains of the frontier. He is by profession a vampire hunter. However, within him are many secrets. Some are revealed in the film. For instance, his left hand is some kind of magical symbiote with a nasty sense of humor who seems to exist mostly to torture D with said sense of humor. But he also happens to have something kind of akin to Miroku's wind tunnel from Inuyasha, amongst other various tricks and abilities. D himself is also a dhampir, half vampire, half human, making him the ultimate tragic hero. He has a lust for blood that he can never satiate due to compassion for humans, but he's also hated by the nobility for his mixed blood. On top of that, he's feared and hated by humans simply because of what he is, regardless of any achievements. D also exists in a world of endless strife, so he only works for pay, which earns him the same amount of respect as a bounty hunter that is also a demon. He knows love, but isn't able to embrace it. It can also be assumed that he is very old. But as far as the film itself, or even the first novel, Vampire Hunter D isn't what you'd call one of the greats. The animation is subpar for a movie. The story, which mostly revolves around the girl from the beginning, Doris Lang, being freed from the vampiric curse put upon her, which of course pits D and Left Hand against a noble and his minions in the attempt to protect her and break the curse. It's nothing super special if you're looking at it objectively. Obviously, this video has been full of awesome shots and action from the film, but really going into it, at least the plot of Vampire Hunter D 1985, is kind of unnecessary. If you want more info on D himself and more lore on the world, I recommend checking out our other Vampire Hunter D video when this is done. However, within this first story's very simple plot lies seeds upon seeds for furthering a story and expanding a world. There's imagery within the film that is iconic to this day, and I think judging a film like this arbitrarily by itself is kind of pointless, regardless of quality, which, mind you, doesn't bother me at all personally. The impact of this film can't be denied. It was a crack in the door that shone a light on what could be done with mature animation. It was one of the first, more widely witnessed examples of what was waiting for us across the sea. It's difficult to relay the kind of liberation something like Vampire Hunter D was at the time. The late 80s and early 90s in the West were a tumultuous period where children were political chess pieces, and how to properly protect them from the dangers of violent media was a career maker for some of the most awful people still residing in the American government today.
It is a sick, disgusting video game in my judgment. It's an effort to trap and kill women. Shame on people that produce that trash. It's child abuse in my judgment.
I don't believe what I just saw.
Without the early introduction of D, I likely wouldn't have found other movies like Ninja Scroll or Kikuchi-san's other works that have come to define this channel, like Wicked City. And I think, importantly for me, it led me to find the world of Vampire Hunter D within the books, and it's truly engaging. Since its Western debut, the film has become a cult classic and led a lot of people in defining their tastes when it comes to anime. Its sequel film, Bloodlust, which surpasses the first in every single way, would drastically help in that endeavor, and we will be covering that in October. However, if you're already a super fan, or if this video has got you interested in the universe or just this movie, now is absolutely the best time to give it a shot, or to watch this film again. Sentai Filmworks has remastered the original, redubbed it, and released it on Blu-ray. It is leagues better than it used to be. It's crazy how much better it looks. You've been seeing visuals from it this entire time. But honestly, the new dub is fantastic. Now is also the best time to get into the Vampire Hunter D novels as well. Dark Horse Comics, who have been in charge of the manga adaptation of the books, started releasing omnibus versions of the novels. I have the first one here already, and I believe the second one is due out soon. It's 3 books in one, and you get a physical version of it. But if you don't want the physical version, all of them are available to download on your iPad and stuff. But I think most importantly, never forget that just because something isn't cool right now doesn't mean it'll stay that way forever. Personally, when I was a kid, I read comic books, I loved superheroes, I loved anime, and everybody thought that that was the stupidest thing in the world. Now, comic book movies make more money than any movies have ever made previously, and like, everybody's a weeb. It's a weird existence. Kikuchi-san tried, and arguably failed, to grab the boomer genre flick fad while it was hot. However, in doing things his way, which of course was titties and gore. Over time, his vision of this post-apocalyptic future, inspired by the post-war existence he led when he was a child and the films that inspired him as he grew up, turned into one of the best-selling novel series of all time, with well over 17 million copies sold worldwide. Not to mention 2 animated movies, a manga, radio dramas, and much more. Sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it just takes the product finding the right audience. But before Fallout, before Bloodborne, before Akira, there was Hideyuki Kikuchi in Vampire Hunter D, and it's going stronger than ever. Guys, hey, don't forget about Figurama's insane Vampire Hunter D statue. This is a literal once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm telling you, man, these things sell out on day one. If you are a super fan, this is your time. We don't get commission. I'm not trying to make money off of your sale. I just want to make sure that you get your opportunity. To help out a little bit, use code BPVHDFC for $25 off. I would like to thank our lucky patron of the week, Elevator Music, and our high-tier patron of the week, Omni Penguin. My name is Mike. This is Bonsai Pop. Thanks so much for watching. We got more D, we have more horror, so check it out. Maybe subscribe if you like what you see, and I'll see you next time.